Hello, lovely beings. I have a humongously awesome episode for you today with the Archbishop Kristina Rake. I should say the divinely lit Archbishop Kristina Rake. um, Archbishop Kristina Rake runs the Catholic Church in Exile and also is the president and professor of theology of St. Hildegard Theology Seminary. So, Kristina, first of all, hello, my dear.
Hello, it's so good to see you.
You too. For all of you who are listening, if you don't fully know by now, Kristina is actually a huge part of my origin story with doing my YouTube channel and also really just getting out there on podcasts. I had started my YouTube channel, basically thought I was doing 7 episodes, and then I was done. It was going to be on the internet and I was walking away. And I end up hearing you on the Uncomfortable podcast with Eric. And as I'm listening, I have tears streaming down my face because this is the first time that I've heard anyone from organized religion talk about people like me and us, because you and I are very similar, and also a female. And it opened my heart just brilliantly. I couldn't extol your virtues enough. I reached out to Eric, and then the rest is history. And this is probably how most of you have heard about me in one shape or form. So, Kristina, thank you for being guided by spirit for doing that episode with Eric and the joy of not only me, but so many other people listening to it and being inspired again by organized religion and understanding that there are wonderful people in this world like you and your church and what you are trying to do. You not only are LGBTQIA plus inclusive, and you have outreach programs to help them in other countries that aren't like ours and they don't have rights. And you also have an orphanage in Kenya.
Hmm. Yes.
And the orphanage in Kenya is a huge place in my heart. Anything that comes with kids, I'm super overprotective of children. So
Right.
um, I hope today that any of you listening, if you get something wonderful out of this, if it's you buy Kristina's book or you end up taking her courses, which we're going to talk about a lot today, even if it's $5 and you can donate that one time, please do. I will have everything in the show notes as to how to do that. It is so vitally important that these children get to eat.
Yeah.
I donate on a regular basis. I care. I'm trying not to cry because I'm a big old softie when it comes to anyone in need, but especially when it comes to kids. I personally believe that there's absolutely no reason why any child in this world should not be A, taken properly care of, but also B, should be in need of food. That
Yeah.
just is awful to me. So thank you for doing that. And thank you for agreeing to come on my little tiny show and chat and answer some questions about your book and your demonology course. Let's start with the book, God and the Paranormal.
Hmm.
I was blessed that when I met you at Bigfoot and Brews last year, that you gave me a signed copy, which I cherish. I, I immediately started reading it on my 15-hour plane ride home with all my layovers. And there are some key points that I want to go over because, it
Sure.
is a big book, right? Like it's a big book, it's chock full of information. And I know that there's a ton of people who listen to me or are in spirituality now, but came from a religious background. And,
Right.
having someone with your educational background. And I would like you just to take a moment first and share your educational background because it's huge.
Thank you. I have uh, technically two bachelor's degrees in English literature and history. And then I have a master's in theological study from Andover Newton at Yale Divinity, with an additional 18 graduate credits in psychology and religion. I was a member of Mensa. I was accepted into the PhD program in applied physics at NIU, but I got pregnant and I couldn't go. Um, I switched. I kept my love of science, but for the past, oh my gosh, 32 years, I have taught undergraduate and graduate style theology courses at churches, at dioceses, at schools, in all manner of types, and it's this kind of theology, scripture, and that. In addition, I owned my own corporation for 15 years in educational consulting, and so I wrote tests and textbooks for every grade from kindergarten through college, based on cognitive studies and neuroscience and how people process information, the ACT, the SAT, the GRE, the LSAT, entrance exams, IQ tests, corporation tests. And so how people learn and how they understand topics is really hardwired into the way I talk and the way I write. And so along those two trajectories, when I started St. Hildegard's, I began teaching theology and demonology, to which it sort of dovetails with religious anthropology. So those are my areas of expertise: religious anthropology, theology, and then scripture. And so the study I've done for those has been pretty extensive. In fact, when I get an email from you and you have a list of topics, I'm like, oh shoot, all right, I gotta go pull out a book and remind myself what that was, because the studies get really thick,
Yeah.
and it's like, oh, I've got to remind myself I used to know that, so that my brain can't hold it all anymore. That's why I've got books.
And by the
But
way, she just
so
actually showed me a book that I think was like 4 or 5 inches thick. So
yes, I'm sorry if you're listening. I have a reference book called Dictionary of Deities and Demons in the Bible, and it is 1,000 pages. And don't go out looking for it. You won't understand it. You actually have to know languages and stuff for the little things. But yeah, that's always on my desk. So
yeah,
I can flip
I
it
love how you
open.
just like glossed over was it Yale, you said?
Yes. I went to Andover Newton, which at the time had a close relationship to Yale when I graduated, but the year after I graduated, they unified with Yale. So all of my transcripts, everything is Andover Newton at Yale Divinity. And I'm a Yale alumni, and I paid a Yale price, frankly. But at the time they were their own school, and now they're embedded. So I
Uh,
don't
I
want to
I just
lie
like to
about it, but
well, you're not lying about it. I want to point it out because and not that names are everything, but this isn't someone who you just read the Bible and decided to start a church. Like you were
oh
extremely
yeah,
highly educated
yes.
and renowned, revered, written, published. You know what it is that you're talking about. And when you talk about all these years that you did in learning how people learn, that actually really comes through not only in your book, but also in the recordings for the demonology course.
Oh,
And
good.
you you have a, in the book, it was hilarious. I was actually laughing out loud in the airport and
I've heard it's
probably looked
funny.
insane, right? So, but in the book, you go into the history of Christianity and the deviations and other break off religions because men basically started disagreeing and therefore started these other religions. And the way that you put it, and there are even parts where you say you're probably wondering, why do I keep going on about this? And I'm laughing in my head because I was actually thinking one of those thoughts, like, God, you're really going over this. And then you bring up this other point, and it's astonishing to me how many people probably attend church or think they're of this sect or the other of Christianity and don't know their origin story of their own religion.
Yes. That
That
was
was
actually
huge.
that's an extensive problem. It was more of a problem before the internet. You would go to an evangelical church and they say, well, Catholicism was invented in the Middle Ages. And me knowing the background is like, wait, what? No, it goes back to Judaism. That's why it's so Jewish. You were invented in 1849. But
Yeah.
then as the internet came and people were like, oh, here's this first century text, and whoa, that's the mass. And they're talking about priests and popes and deacons and bishops. Now that narrative is changed to, yes, but it was Catholic, but it fell into apostasy. And so now we do this. And the whole narrative is changed, and when I heard that, I was like, "Oh, that's interesting," because that was not the story 30 years ago, and I'm not digging at evangelicals in particular. It's not a problem that people disagree and have their own faith story. I'm all on board with that, as long as you understand where it came from,
Yes.
and you can agree with it, like, if I come out of the Roman Catholic Church, I know what a god awful mess those guys are, and I know what they're doing. I mean, I that's part of my origin story, but I know. So, I keep it in the back of my mind. So it is important for people to understand that, "Oh, we have the King James Bible, and Catholics added books to the Old Testament." I'm like, "No, Martin Luther, who founded Protestantism, removed them." And it's important to make that distinction because people need to understand. And again, you can be okay with that and say, yeah, we don't want those books in the Bible. There's a justification for it. But you need
Hmm.
to understand that that's what happened, that there's another fact here that you may not be getting from your church.
Well, absolutely. And the reason why he decided to take certain books out, which I won't give it all away because the book is completely worth it. It was $25 on Amazon, and it's
Yeah, you
like,
actually dropped the price, so it's only 20 now.
wow. Okay. So y'all got $5 off. Okay.
Yes, it's worth it.
It is, and I actually put it on my list of required reading for
Oh,
some
wow,
of the
thank
YouTubes
you.
that I do. Yeah, well, Christina, I don't do that just because I love and adore you. I do it because it really warrants being read.
Mm,
And there were, I've grown up with a lot of this, right? So a
yeah,
lot of there was a lot of it that I was like, okay, yeah, that's cool. Oh, okay, there's the source for that I already knew. But the part of the different sects of Christianity, when you broke down why they broke up and how it all became, this one guy didn't like this one part. So he was like, I'm just going to throw these parts out that don't agree with me. And so what it made me do is actually go back because I was raised with the King James Version. It made me go back and actually start listening to like the Book of Jasher and the Book of
mm,
Jubilees.
mhm,
And when I listened to them, because I didn't want to read them, I had to audio listen while I was doing stuff. And I was like, oh, now I get why he threw those out. Like,
mhm.
those are extremely problematic because they basically state what his issue was.
Yes,
And fantastic, fantastic description. Um, so specifically, the one part that I find that I'd like you to expand upon is how basically this one man took up issue with how the Bible stated how one gets into heaven. And then
mhm,
he threw all the gospels out that didn't meet his narrative. Can
yes.
you just go into that real quick?
Sure, and, I'll just distinguish because a lot of people the last time I threw around the name Martin Luther, people thought I meant Martin Luther King, and so I
Yeah,
gotta
no.
just, um,
Older than that.
yeah, understand that the Roman Catholic Church in the 1500s was a big problem. Not that it's ever changed, but things were very corrupt. Priests were selling what we call indulgences, which honestly I just kind of dismiss out of hand. But it was, hey, you go to purgatory. It's this horrible place, and give me $100 and I'll take a year off of purgatory. And it's like, okay, guys, that's not how time works. We understand that now. That's not how the afterlife works. We understand that now. But at the time, these priests and bishops and popes were incredibly corrupt. So Martin Luther was a Roman Catholic Augustinian monk. And while he was, and Lutherans will tell you this because that's where they get their name. They follow Martin Luther. Lutherans will tell you this while he was IC, which means in closet, which means on the toilet. He got this idea. He wrote that, not me. And Lutherans joke about it. He got the idea while he was in the bathroom. He got this notion that you are saved by faith alone. Now, that's become the mantra of
Mhm.
evangelicals, but the problem is it doesn't exist in the Bible. And in fact, the only term where faith alone is used in the Bible is in James, where it says, "You are not saved by faith alone." So,
Pretty
and
clear, huh?
yeah, I can get into saved. I mean, sozo in Greek means healed, not into heaven or saved from hell. So that's already a big problem for me theologically. But his notion was you only have to have faith. Well, what is faith? I mean, if faith is the intellectual assent to the proposition that Jesus Christ is Lord and Savior, the way I have faith that this is bubbly water, that's not what faith is. If you say faith is complete submission to God and all of God's commands for your love of neighbor, then yeah, we're saved by faith alone, but it involves deeds. So anyway, Martin Luther was like, nope, you don't have to do anything, because if you don't have to do anything, it gets rid of purgatory, it gets rid of indulgences. So that was his thinking. And frankly, I'm on board with him with that. All right. So what happened was he nailed the thesis. I mean, I understand his point. Here's the corruption, but he threw the baby out with the bathwater. So he said, no purgatory. But when he translated the Bible into German in 1521, he said, you know what? There are 8 books in the Old Testament that have been part of the Old Testament for 1,500 years and were part of the Hebrew Bible for a few hundred years before that. So, but they talk about prayer for the dead. That's a problem. I don't like indulgences. So I'm just going to pluck them and throw them out. And he said, well, the Jews don't have them in their Old Testament, but the Jewish people don't think of scripture that way. And one of the books talks about Hanukkah and isn't in their technical Old Testament, but they're not Bible alone. There's all this tradition that they include in their teaching. So he's like, all right, here's my justification. The Jewish nation in 70 AD kicked them out, but Jesus quoted from them. they they were part of it. And
Yeah.
then it went so far that he was mad at James because James said you're not saved by faith alone. So he removed James from the New Testament. He removed Revelation, which would
Oh.
shock many evangelicals, because Revelation said their deeds go with them to heaven and their deeds will testify for them before God. So that's works. That's something you do, not what you believe. And so he got rid of that. And then he said, you know what? It's the New Testament's basically just the Gospel of John and the letters of Paul, which is 1/3 of the New
Uh-huh.
Testament. Then he did something that really set everybody afire. He added a word to one of Paul's letters where it said, see that we are not saved by works of the law, but are saved by faith. He added the word alone. We're
Oh.
saved by faith alone. And in his letters, when Catholics were going crazy on his father's followers said, Dr. Martin, what do we tell them? And he's like, I know it's not in there. Papists, meaning Catholics, and asses are the same thing. When they tell you why is the word alone in this in Romans 8:10, he said, when they ask you why the word alone is in there, you tell them, and I'm quoting his letter, Dr. Martin Luther would have it so.
Wow.
So now the Catholics responded and said, you know what? Yeah, this is corrupt. It is now illegal to sell indulgences. It is now illegal to do this and illegal to do that. And you know what? We have to refine this teaching on purgatory. We've addressed all your concerns. Martin, come back. And he said, no. He was married. He had power in Germany. And you know. So again, people are fallible. They make mistakes. Maybe his intention started out well, but it turned into a personal ego thing for him. Um,
It did, and to every tis there is a fro, right? So
yeah.
what he set in motion has dribbled down in a torrent to modern day Christianity,
Hmm.
in which a lot of people feel, and this is going to dovetail into what we'll talk about next, but it, a lot of Christians, and I've heard this numerous times, and I'm not going to lie, it scares me each and every time. When I hear Christians who are doing, whether it's paranormal investigations or they're in bringing up, I don't want to say invoking, but in a way they are something bad, they seem to think, I don't need any spiritual protection because I believe in Jesus.
Mm,
And, my answer to that numerous times is that's fine and great. So do I. But even I shod the armor of God, and I make sure that I am doing my best to prevent an attack versus just blatantly inviting it in and just hope in a prayer, right?
yeah.
That Jesus is going to save me. And the other thing is, I mean, how many major exorcism cases do you and I know of that have been people who were nuns, priests,
Oh, yeah, there's a
pastors,
lot of them.
ministers? I mean, very devout people. So if and when I bring that up, the answer that I get from them is a very simple, well, their faith must have been, open, or they must have done something to invite that or invoke that. And yeah, okay, that's kind of judgy in and of itself, but I think it's important for everyone to have exterior ways of protecting themselves besides just faith alone. And your book really brought that up in a way that I felt was so important, because if you don't know the spiritual foundation and basis of what it is that you believe and why you believe what it is, right? Like, i.e., why is it the King James Version only versus any other Bible? And not understanding that books were deliberately taken out because this one man went on, I'm just going to say, an ego trip because he
Mm.
didn't like it. And you think you're getting into heaven just because you believe, but you can be the crappiest person around and do absolutely nothing good for humanity whatsoever. But just because you believe, you're going to heaven. But the person who has been the most humble, pious, and done all the good that they possibly can, but maybe never knew Jesus, or really didn't understand God because they lived in the middle of a rainforest somewhere or something, right? And it was just never brought to them, that they're going to hell and they're being damned for all eternity. That that has never made sense to me. But you breaking this down, I really, really, really feel, God, your book, like the first 3 chapters alone, were so incredibly important. I could talk probably for like 3 hours on the first 3 chapters.
Well, you brought up an important point, and just jumping in, first of all, this notion that you only have to have this belief and that you don't have to do anything good. I mean, James calls that the doctrine of demons. The letter of James in the New Testament, he says, do you believe in God? You do well. Even demons believe in God and tremble.
Ooh, girl,
And he
I'm
uses
clapping.
the word ignoramus. He calls people who believe that idiots. He says this is a doctrine of demons. Why did Martin Luther want to get rid of James? That's why Martin Luther wanted to get rid of James, you know. But
James.
also this notion that I have faith. Well, and we're in Lent right now. Today's Ash Wednesday, and we talk about the time that Jesus went out into the desert for 40 days and was tempted by Lucifer. And what did Lucifer offer Jesus? Lucifer said to him, go to the top of this mountain and throw yourself down, because God will protect you. Right? And he quoted scripture to Jesus. And what did Jesus say? No, you won't tempt the Lord your God. Jesus literally, and they would answer, well, if I said Joe said this, they'd say, well, Joe didn't have enough faith. All right, I'm sorry, that was Jesus. He was God. And he said, no, don't do that. It's not enough to just believe. Jesus believed. I mean, he
Yeah.
was God, but he said, no, no, that's not how this works.
And and we differ in opinion. So I believe that Jesus was the son of God, or
Right,
son of man, as he stated.
right.
Not God. I respect everyone else's belief if you believe differently, and I understand that especially in your belief system, that Jesus was the son, and then you have the Holy Spirit, so there's part of the Holy Trinity, and I get that. Not negating that. But even in that one line alone, Jesus is basically telling the adversary, like, why would you try to tempt God? Like, no, I'm not doing this. And it's and he's not even saying it in the aspect of himself. He's saying it, don't tempt God. So if this is Jesus stating that, then all of these Christian followers who are handling snakes or doing all the other stuff, right? In which they're just tempting God and fate, pretty
Yeah,
much, or going
yeah.
into an abandoned warehouse that's rife with demon activity, and then, screaming, come at me, bro. Hello.
It's an
So,
invitation.
yeah,
Yeah.
it is.
Jesus
And it,
said, if you're going to invite this, then that's what's going to happen because God is all about free will. And it's invitation after invitation after invitation. And let me tell you, the other side, the demonic is all about dotting the I's and crossing the T's in contracts to keep God's side from coming in. So they're like, see, we gave him 102 opportunities to not do this, and he did it anyway. I think of the movie Devil's Advocate, where
oh,
at the
yeah.
end, Keanu Reeves is like, you tricked me. He's like, no, at every time you were about to make the wrong decision, I told you not to. So that's how he got him. It's all about, hey, I offered, you took it up. I offered, you took it up. I offered, you took it up.
It's actually a good movie. I'm going to put it in the show notes that everyone might want to revisit. The Devil's Advocate. It
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 was very good, very
it
well done.
was. So another part of your book was just an overview of people like us and how these gifts are divinely given, and they're used not only with ministerial duties, right? Which I'm a minister, you're an archbishop, you're also a pastor, but also because you and I both do exorcisms and entity removal. That's
Yeah.
my nicer way of putting it, right? Um, you and I had talked about this privately when we were coming back from Bigfoot and Bruce after we had watched Stacey Brown's movie, and
Yes.
I wanted to throw a bucket of holy water at the TV. But we were both talking about how, in order for us to be effective, and just for the listener to understand, doing exorcisms and entity removals is really something I believe you have to be called to do. It's not just something you go and decide one day, oh, I'm interested in doing this, and you willy-nilly want to mess around. Like, I was called to this, and there are definitely days, and I'm sure Kristina can agree, where we both wonder, like, can we have a break?
Yeah.
Anything else? But to be effective at what it is that we're doing, we have to have additional sixth sense gifts, i.e.,
Mhm.
being psychic, empathic, sensitive to the energies around us. Because let's face it, we're dealing with something not in a human flesh body, right? It's not just going to sit there and talk to us unless it's
Right.
talking through somebody. So, you know, in hearing someone of your stature and coming from a more organized religion, talking about people like us with our gifts and how they've been used over time was not only beautiful, but for the amount of times I've been, called a witch and I'm going to hell and all these things, right? Because of the different gifts that I have, which I just started leaning into the witch part eventually. I was like, fine,
Yeah.
you're gonna
Yep.
call me it. I'm just gonna wear it with joy at this point. It's recently I was led to read the Book of Daniel.
Hmm.
And I got through the first 8 chapters and I'm a little confused, right? Because it came very prominently through all these different ways. And I got through the first 8 chapters and I went, oh, okay, I'm led to read this because Daniel was like us, right? With his various different gifts. And then I got pushed even more and got to the end and I was like, okay, this did not end well. But yeah, it is very solemn and heavy. But I like you just to talk about a little bit of the divine gifts and different ways that they've manifested for you and also that you've used them just to further on your duties.
Oh, sure. You have to understand first that the gifts for me came first and the religion came later. I was raised in a house where I was very much called to this. I mean, I used to have dreams about the Catholic Church. You have the dreams about being a Catholic bishop. And as a woman, I would laugh when I'd have those dreams. I'm like, yeah, that's good one, God. I'd like to see you make that happen. Never tempt God. He's like, hold my beer.
Right.
Um, but in my house with my parents, my gifts were very much, oh yeah, Kristina can see dead people. She could talk to dead people. She knows when things are going to happen. She could tell when someone's lying. She could, even as a young child, it was like they would lean into that. And they're like, oh, she has these gifts and this is good. And when they happen, it's normal, it's natural. But they hated religion. So when I would go towards I really want to go to church with Nana and Papa, don't say that to them. So I had the opposite where it was the organized religion part that was being squashed and the gifts that were being held up. So for me, as I moved into the organized religion, the gifts were completely solid and upheld by everyone around me. So I thought it was normal. And then I start to learn, no, not everybody can do this. And it
Mhm.
kind of freaks people out. So I subsumed them as I started moving in the organized religion world. And then I saw, well, we're talking about the same thing. We're just using different words. You say psychic medium gifts over here, but over here you can talk about the gifts of the Holy Spirit, the gifts that saints have. Pentecostals believe in a whole bunch of spiritual gifts. They're no different. They're no
Mhm.
different. They're the same sets of gifts, but we're using different words for them. Um, I remember I was part of a lot of healings and casting out attachments as part of this conservative Catholic group. And then the second I went, I might be a psychic medium. It never occurred to me. Am I that? Is that what that is? I didn't, that was 2010. I mean, what was I, like 30 at that point, 35? That occurred to me later. This was just part and parcel of everything. So in my own journey, it was accepting that, yeah, you can be both because I'm called to both. I was given both.
Yep.
And they're not mutually exclusive. I have clergy in my church who have gifts like mine and who feel called towards exorcism, and I work with them on their gifts in this context so that they can understand. And the book started as an email, and people
Wow.
would email me and say, "How can you be Christian and have psychic medium gifts?" And I'm like, "Oh, this is easy." For me, I'm like, "Oh, here you go. Here's this scripture, this scripture, this scripture." It got to the point where it was 35 pages. People would ask me that question, and I'd copy and paste and just send it to them, and copy and paste and just say, and I'm like, "Screw it, I'm going to write a book." That was just my answer so that I don't have to keep answering this question.
I
Um,
love it.
so it all tied together for me, but in the opposite way. Most people have the gifts, but they're brought up in an oppressive religious household and they have to fight against it. So that rupture is with organized religion so I can be who I'm meant to be. Gay people feel the same rupture. Trans people feel the same rupture of that oppressive religion and who I really am. For me, it was, this is who I really am, but the religion is also who I really am. So I went about it kind of the opposite way, and I think that's why it was so easy for me to reconcile it, because I came from anything goes religion, to more structure, but I never lost that freedom of conscience and the right of a person to be who they are in God, regardless of what their beliefs entail. So that's how I wound up on this road, and that's why it's so important to me that people understand that these gifts aren't evil, not by any stretch of the imagination. They are God-given and they are necessary to help other people.
I couldn't, hats off again. This is why I love talking to you, because you're able to put things so beautifully, and you're able to speak to people on a level. I was raised in metaphysical Christian home.
Mhm.
So although yes, it was Bible based, it went above and beyond that. And so we were never taught to, think inside of a box, right? It wasn't a closed formal religion the way that a lot of people listening might have been raised, like you were
Yeah.
saying. And because of that, I'm grateful, because I was always course guided, right? And then, of
Mhm.
course, having people on both sides in my lineage going all the way back who were also gifted. It was, the whole we don't talk about it with outsiders, but this is how you deal with it. Whereas you had almost the complete opposite. You had, flower child almost type upbringing with no organized religion. And yet inside you were ardently passionate for organized religion, but you just knew that the religion that was at that time wasn't completely congruent with who you are yet. And all
Exactly.
these years later, you've really founded and created this beautiful environment where people can be in an organized religion, but also be themselves.
Yes.
I too, I know so many people, who are gay, trans, and have felt so ousted from organized religion, and
Oh,
yet
yeah.
they feverishly want to be a part of it. And to me that's so sad, because I mean, hello, if you read anything Jesus said, it was all about loving, your neighbor.
Right.
And again, it goes back to when these schisms started, because man started futzing with stuff.
Yep, right from the beginning, the religious trauma, and religious trauma is a huge area of study right now. The religious trauma that people incur because they have gifts, because they're LGBTQIA, because they disagree with the
Mhm.
pastor, because they're divorced, because they had a child out of wedlock.
Yeah.
The toxic shame that they carry around inside of them, I mean, it affects our health, it affects our body, it just messes with us, when the fact of the matter is, true religion, Christianity is about removing or healing shame. It's about pulling it out of us so that there's nothing interfering with our personal, relationship with God. And to use that to then instill shame in people and to
Mhm.
control them and to pull them inside. And that's why when we changed our name, we chose the Catholic Church in Exile, because it demonstrates the solidarity of people who are cast out of institutions and who are journeying. And they might come with us and journey for a few steps and say, all right, that was wonderful that I wasn't judged. Thank you. But I meant to go off in this direction. And we're like, thanks for joining us. Keep in touch. It's okay. And we keep going because it's not about judgment. Um,
Yeah.
Jesus was very clear that when you die, God's going to judge you with the same judgment you used on other people. And let me tell you something, it's not gonna be a good time for a lot of Christians. It's just not gonna be fun. Nope.
Yeah, that's putting it lightly. Wow. Powerful words. I feel like even when I listen back to this, I think I'm gonna like rewind and replay what you just said, like I said, 15 times, and then maybe get a loudspeaker for my car and just drive around and play it.
Yeah, it needs to get out there that that's not what real religion, it's not what true Christianity was ever about.
Right. I completely agree. And the amount of judgment happening lately and divisiveness is
Mm.
just beyond me. And that's a whole you and I can have like an 8-hour conversation on that. We'll probably need drinks involved.
Oh,
So,
yeah. Yeah, it's horrific, and I understand why it's happening,
yeah.
and I understand, even algorithms play a part in directing us to what we already believe and showing us, and so we get these echo chambers. There's so much playing into it, but it is causing just splinters everywhere
Yeah.
in every organization.
Yeah, absolute mayhem. And the hypocrisy. It's the hypocrisy for me, Christine.
Yeah, yeah.
Just I have moments with it where I'm like, I just need to turn it off and go watch a puppy video or something.
Oh, yeah, I watch babies. When I
Yes,
get fresh, I watch baby videos. They make me
yeah,
happy.
anything like baby hedgehog.
Yeah.
So, speaking of current times and all the divisiveness and craziness, I wanted to touch on some things that are in your demonology course.
Mhm.
Um, So, just for you all who are listening to understand, so Christina has come up with a demonology course. It is $130. It's a donation to the church. You email Christina and then she signs you up and sends you the link. You can go in and out of it as many times as you need. There are numerous different YouTube videos that Christina does. You also have visuals in there, and then you also
Mhm.
have some of the things that you're talking about with the bullet points of writing. So it's very multifaceted in how people learn. So we're listening to you speak, you have the visuals, and then you also have some things you can read, which is super helpful because like you said earlier, everyone learns in different ways. I'm finding that
Right.
out more and more myself. So there's there's so much in it, Christina, that first of all, the fact it's only $130 is beyond cheap because the amount of information and fact finding you had to go into to come up with all of this is great. And obviously demonology, right? Like just that alone, some people are going to be like, yeah, no, don't want to hear about that. But you go into so much about how religion started and you go back to, Babylonian, Sumerian, and you kind of start there. And you really start with talking about the concept of how the old gods ended up becoming demons over time with Christianity.
Yes.
And that is humongous because I just finished this 3-part advanced series in which I'm discussing some of that. And a lot of people, this might be the first time that they've ever heard that, especially from someone of clergy, such as yourself. So, go on, sis.
And the course isn't even finished. I had to stop and take some time to do a deep dive into the origins of the occult in the Middle Ages and how that changed demonology. So for those of you who aren't in it, there's still more to come. The bibliography is 30 pages. Most people think there's 10 books out there about demonology, and I'm like, well, no, here's the problem. A lot of people don't understand. This is academic demonology. This is
Yeah.
what PhDs specialize in. It's the history of the concept of evil and how it moved from the beginning of writing. I even start at Neanderthals and how religion
Yeah.
started all the way through to the modern day. And we'll get to that point with the medieval occultists because that was just off the hinge. And Egyptian demonology and Muslim demonology. I've got those ready to go. So anyway, it's about you understanding where all this comes from because too many people and it's not their fault. It's the Dunning-Kruger effect that you have to be an expert to know what you don't know. Um, and and you can't tell the difference between a conspiracy or incorrect information and opinion in fact if you're not already well versed. You could come to me and say, "Oh my God, did you hear the government is filing down firing pins and guns so that they'll explode backwards?" And I could be like, I have no knowledge of guns. I mean, I pack when I travel, but that's about all I know. So you could be telling me absolute truth. I would have no idea. So when people come to me and they're like, "Oh, well, you understand, this particular Tiamat is a demon and it has to do with Lilith," and I'm like, "No, no, where'd you get that?" Like, people have come to me with biblical conspiracies, and we had talked a little bit about the Nephilim, and they'll come with ideas about the Nephilim and the virus of the Nephilim and genetics, and I'll sit back and go, "No, they all died." And "What are you talking about?" I'm like, "They're dead. They're gone. They don't exist. They never they're dead." And but in order to get that information, you have to know what manuscripts to look at, and it requires so much learning. It's no one's fault. Um, but that enters into, I think, the concept of learning this and taking this course, so when people tell you that nonsense, you could be like, "Yeah, no, that's not where that comes from." I was in Bishop Rake's course, and in Samaria, they had these things, and they had the toilet demons and the lurkers and all of this and the incubation. I love the toilet demons. They crack me up.
Oh my
But
God. I think I had to pause it and just like laugh for 5 minutes when you talked about the toilet bowl demons
and
because
Myrtle from Harry Potter, the toilet bowl ghost. Yeah, it's an actual thing. And go
yeah.
back thousands of years. Um, so when you understand it, when people come to you and say, "Well, this person's possessed of the spirit of Jezebel," you could be like, "What?" All
Yeah.
right. First of all, doesn't matter who's possessing them. Process is still the same. So we're just going to get rid of it. And they're like, "Well, don't you ask the demon questions?" I'm like, "You never ask a demon questions. They lie."
Yeah,
Um,
I mean that's their job, right? Like,
well, when you read Roman Catholic exorcists, they're so conservative. They're like, "Oh, the demons are very happy that we're open to gay people, and the demons are happy." And I'm like, "Why are you listening to them? They
uh-huh.
want us to think in terms of black and white because it's divisive.
Right.
They're happy that you believe that, you moron." That's where I'm screaming.
Yeah, I mean, and also like, why are you sitting? These are supposed to be your mortal enemy that you're not paying attention to and listening, and yet you're sitting there having a conversation and then taking their word for it as if
That
they're
drives
giving
me
you the
nuts.
truth.
Yeah.
Uh, so Lilith herself,
Yes.
this is getting brought up a lot,
Yeah.
unfortunately, lately. So, origin story of Lilith.
Well, and I'm just gonna put a plug, watch for my novel, because I address some of her backstory in that novel.
Oh,
Lilith
I'm
was a
so
demon. Lilith was Adam's first wife. And incidentally, Lilith had red hair, and so did Adam, according to the Jewish rabbis, but we'll get to that. Lilith was Adam's first wife, and Lilith was frustrated because it seemed like God only talked to Adam. This is the story in Judaism. God talked to Adam, Lilith felt left out, and so Lilith left the garden. She just left. What does that mean? Well, in Judeo-Christian theology, it means that Lilith was human and she never fell. So
so
stay
Lilith.
tuned. So Lilith has seniority. She's not, but she came to be associated with the Queen of Demons, with stealing children at childbirth, because in the Garden of Eden, it wasn't until Adam and Eve fell that, and all right, I'm going to my theology, but it's the first time they had children. Marriage occurred after we fell, not before. It's a fallen institution. Childbirth is a fallen institution. There are theories that Adam and Eve might have lived forever if they'd never fallen, so there wouldn't be need for children. God would just pluck people to be friends with. But anyway, so Lilith is supposed to have run from the garden and become the queen of the night, the queen of demons. And that story for Lilith didn't become really big until Viking religion came down in Europe, and all of a sudden they're like, "Oh, but the queen, the head of all the bad people, is a woman, and Baldar and all of that religion. And so when Viking religion moved south, everybody, it changed demonology. It's not the other way around. And everybody's like, Lucifer has a mother. It's got to be Lilith, because we've heard of Lilith. The Jews talk about Lilith. Not only that, Lucifer has a grandmother and 5 children. And so these are theories. I mean, human beings come up with these theories based on bits and pieces of information, and they're great stories. But, I'm not in hell. I don't know if Lucifer has a mother. Maybe he does. I don't know. I don't really want to know.
Well, and also, Lucifer itself was an allegory used. It doesn't actually mean, Satan or the devil, right? And as you were talking about, Satan was a job title. It wasn't a person.
Yes.
It was a
Yes.
job title. So, and that's why people will say in certain certain religions, I won't name what, will say the great Satan. It's,
Uh-huh.
it's a job title. It's not necessarily, one specific entity, deity. It can be interchangeable. I referred to it as the adversary because the
Mm-hmm.
adversary can is adversarial, and that
Mm-hmm.
is somewhat needed on our plane, right? Because humans, let's face it, we don't do much unless we're kicked in the butt. But even even an overview of that and going into that, and I'm super excited about your other book. I didn't even mention that that one was coming out soon because I know you're still working on it, but I'm stoked. um one thing that I found really interesting was when you brought up about Loki and
Mm-hmm.
how basically, like you were saying, the Norse and the pagans started intermingling when people started wandering and intermingling. And then you had the legend of Loki from the Norse.
Mm-hmm.
And then eventually Loki gets kind of caught up and then he becomes the devil, right?
Mm-hmm.
But Loki had his quote unquote ice giants. And
Right.
then over time, Christianity kind of adopted them and made them demons.
Yes.
And then this ties into the Nephilim.
Yes.
So speak on it.
It's interesting. The process by which religions influence each other is called syncretism. So for example, Lilith, the concept of Lilith entered into Hebrew consciousness um, as they encountered other religions where you had Lamishtu and Pazuzu. Everybody knows Pazuzu.
Yep.
Look up the Mesopotamian hell tablet. There he is, half lion, half a griffin and all that. But Lamishtu and Pazuzu were married, and they used Pazuzu to exorcise his wife. They're like, hey, Pazuzu, kick her out of this person. And that's on the Mesopotamian hell tablet. And then Lamishtu became Lilu in the Hittites and became Lilith in the Hebrew. So when you hear all this, a lot of people will read this and be like, religion's all man-made, obviously, because they're trading things like trading cards. And my response is always, it's not that it's man-made, it's a lens that we use for experience. And the community experienced that there were different kinds of demons. It experienced that certain demons did this and certain demons did that. And when they bumped into like the Persians, they're like, oh my gosh, we really haven't given much thought to the afterlife. Let's really think about the afterlife. And so God tells us the truth slanted because we can't absorb it all at once. And perception is everything. So this is why I'm so open to other faiths, because I'm like, look, this is my story. I'm going to die and be like, oh, I was way off on that. And that's okay.
Yeah.
Because it's will, intention, and belief that give us power over those evil entities, that give us the stability to cast them out, whatever that will, intention, and belief is, as long as it's on the side of good. I'm your best friend. It doesn't matter to me that you don't agree with me.
Yeah,
That's fine. We'll all find out in the end. Um,
exactly.
but I think that I'm sorry, it's getting back to the Nephilim. So we looked at all these different lenses, and remind me of the second part of the question. I rambled.
Loki and the Ice Giants
Loki
and
and the
how,
ice giants.
yeah.
Yes. So oftentimes what would happen in Mesopotamia, and I bring up Mesopotamia because all the world's religions were all kind of cohered in one basically the space of the state of Texas. Six of the world's greatest civilizations just kept rising and falling and rising and falling and rising and falling. Babylon, Assyria, Persia, Greece, Rome, Samaria. So in this small space, whoever took over, the gods of the previous often became their new demons. So, for example, when the Jewish people were taken over by Egypt in Mesopotamia, the angel of death went through the camp during Moses's 9 plagues and killed the firstborn. Well, then they get taken over by Egypt, and in that subjugation, the story becomes it wasn't an angel of God, it was the demon Sekhmet, who was an Egyptian god. And so this is how, the interplay, whoever is in power demonizes the things that the previous people loved. So oftentimes those became the demons. So Loki was already a demonic figure in Norse theology. Started as a trickster, but he was an ice giant. He was adopted by Odin, and then rebelled. Sound familiar, guys?
Mhm.
The other son rebels. So that trope is throughout all of religions, that there was one who would rebel, even religions that had no contact with each other. So there's something about that, that's just inherent in us. But as Christianity adopted the Norse religions, and as Norse Vikings converted to Christianity throughout Germany, their former bad guy gods became demons. And so as Christianity encountered these pagan religions, a lot of people think, the Christians beat the pagans. Really, the pagans and the Christians kind of merged and worked with each other. It's like, you don't like Loki? All right. Us neither. We're going to be friends. He's going to be the bad guy. We're just going to make him a demon. Um, and it was interesting, like the Fae.
Yeah.
The Fae and fairies and dwarves and all of this, as they were encountered in pagan religions by Christianity, they were allowed to sort of remain, but they were neutral on this earth because they didn't take sides in the original war. That was the story of the Fae.
Which is interesting because you brought up the Grigori, which were also ones who didn't pick sides. And you referenced the voyage of Saint Brendan for that.
Yes. And some of that I think is we have a lot of apocrypha now that people in the Middle Ages lost access to.
Hmm.
It wasn't until it was between the years of 400 AD and 1200 AD, nobody knew what a Greek philosopher was. Nobody knew Judaism,
Yep.
Kabbalah. They didn't know any of that. So when they encountered copies of the Book of Enoch, which are part of the Bible of the Eastern Orthodox Church, they saw the Watchers, and they started to develop the story. Well, the Watchers were people who didn't get involved on either side, the Grigori who didn't get involved in the war in heaven, but some of them didn't because the other Watchers rebelled. Azazel and Centennial, which is came from Satan's Centennial. These two rebelled. But some of them didn't take sides. So and this is again the Dunning-Kruger effect. It's like I'm holding eyeglasses, but you can't see only this part.
Hmm.
So I say, guess what I have in my hand? And you're like, oh, looks like it could be used for this. And then I show you the rest and you're like, oh, okay. So
Yes.
in trying to understand the religion and only having a little piece, when they encountered all of the Apocrypha in the 1300s, 1400s, 1500s, the occult exploded because they're like, oh my God, we've never seen Gnosticism. We've never seen Kabbalah. We've never seen Islamic magic. that's what happens.
There, there was one point that you end up making towards the latter end of the video series. And it makes so much sense, but it was something for whatever reason, like I just hadn't really thought of. But you make this point that you can view history by looking at what laws were enacted
Yeah.
at the time, right? Because whatever laws are enacted shows what was really important to the
Yes.
people and what were like big issues, right?
Yes.
And then you were talking about how things that were made fun of, always in jest, no laws, just, made fun of a lot. You could tell that those weren't real issues. They were just kind of taken lightly. And when I started looking at history through that lens, it was fascinating the connections that I made. And, obviously, if any of you are interested, which again, I highly recommend, I mean, not only does she go through the Sumerian gods, Babylonian gods, witchcraft and laws coming after witchcraft, because that became a little bit of an issue, right? When witchcraft started working, and then the church had to explain, why is it working? Oh, we just need to demonize it because it doesn't follow our doctrine. And then with the merging of, the people of the North, and there was this really interesting part, regarding Cernunnos. I don't know.
Yeah.
That's a really hard word to say.
Yeah.
Cernunnos and Pan. And
Hmm.
then you were saying the devil was found in the north and cold regions
Yes.
because, everyone pretty much at this point is in the Middle East or the Mediterranean. And so, oh, the devil's way up there in the cold parts.
Yeah.
And even when you go back to, ice giants, North mythology, and you start even, zoning out from there, potentially back to Atlantean times and stuff, it's interesting that these themes keep coming up and up
Yes.
and up.
There are certain things that remain, like the color black being
Mhm.
evil, even in areas where people's skin color is darker, black was the color of evil. Um,
Yeah, and that's fascinating, right? Like it keeps coming up. And there was one part that you were talking about, um, you know, a woman does it with a gift and she's considered a witch, but yet a man does it and he's considered a prophet.
that's a huge problem,
Oh,
the patriarchy. Yeah.
yes.
Yeah.
So, highly recommend to everyone, please, please, please listen to that. Kristina, if you have more that you're doing within those videos, I think if someone signs up now, by the time you actually get those new videos posted, they'll probably just be able to get to them. And just the amount of source notes that you have. I mean, you have so much. It's not just YouTube videos of you chatting. I mean, you have source information. So, in and of itself, just everything being in one place and easy resources for people is so much. I will have it again in the show notes, how to sign up. It is the best $130, especially knowing that that money goes to the orphanage
Yeah, I
for the
don't keep a
kids.
penny, guys. I don't need it. That goes right to them.
And even better, right? Like you're learning and the kids are getting fed. That makes
Yeah.
my heart warm. While I have you, I just wanted to go through a couple rapid fire questions with you.
Sure, sure.
What's your favorite apocrypha?
I have 2. I mean, Enoch is of course, and I'm gonna count all 3 books because there are 3 books of Enoch in different languages. Um, my other favorite apocrypha is called, big word, the Proto-Evangelion of James,
Ooh,
the pre-Gospel of James, and this was included in the New Testament, in many New Testaments until the final decision on the New Testament books was made, at the Council of, I'm gonna get this wrong, not Ephesus, the one after.
Nicaea.
Thank you. There was Nicaea,
Welcome.
but then there was a second one too. All right, the Dunning-Kruger, if you say, "Bishop, what parts of Christianity don't you know about?" High on the list is like linear history. I know pockets,
Yeah.
but someone will be like, "What happened to the church in Germany after Napoleon?" I'm like, "I don't know." I'll get a
Give
book.
me a year and a
I
region.
just, that I don't know that. So yes, one of the Council of Constantinople and then Nicaea was Constantinople. But anyway,
Oh, okay.
the Proto-Evangelion of James is huge for people who have a devotion to the Virgin Mary
Okay.
because it tells you the origin of Virgin Mary, and she was a Jewish nun. She's a temple virgin. And
Oh.
they married the temple, well, because a mikveh bath, you have to take naked, and it was required after every period and after every birth for women. So they needed unmarried virgin women to assist these other women in the mikveh bath. It was a ministry at the temple. And they married them off, but they had taken a vow of virginity. And so you learn about what happens when, how does Joseph become her spouse? He's an old man whose wife had died and has grown children. Brothers and sisters of Jesus were stepbrothers and sisters.
Oh.
So it explains so, and plus when she processed in front of Joseph, Joseph was leaning on a staff and the staff bloomed into a lily. Every picture of Joseph has a staff with a lily blooming out of it, but it comes from that story. So
Oh,
that's,
beautiful.
it's beautiful about her childhood and how the birth of Jesus came out and you know all the things she went through. So I love that apocrypha. And then because I love demonology, I love jubilees and the
Jubilees is
apocalypse of
rough.
Paul. It's, these are not easy reads. When you read them, you understand why they didn't make it into the Bible. It wasn't because of what they taught. They were just hard to read. They were slogs, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, I'm not gonna lie. Jubilees was pretty rough.
I was
Um,
just, I'll have to say, I have all the Apocrypha ever written that we have, and it's two
oh,
volumes, and they're this big, Old Testament and New Testament. They're just
oh,
like two volumes like
wonderful.
this. Every single one ever written. And I've read through most of it, but I just want people to understand. I mean, there's a lot.
A
There's a
lot.
lot of it. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you, because you use Catholic Church in your name, have you ever had any flack from the regular Catholic Church?
I have been chased down
Oh.
after a meeting by men trying to take my picture to get it to the bishop. Um, I have almost been denied communion. I joke that they have, you know how stores used to have a photo, don't take a check from this person? I think about
Mm-hmm.
all the sacristies in this diocese, do not give this woman communion. I swear to God. Um, I have. I've been called, I broke with my best friend, my daughter's godfather, who said that I was possessed of a spirit of pride and was putting my children in danger. So I've lost very good, and I went to seminary with him. So I've lost friends. Um, I've been called a witch. I've been chased, not just with the photographs. That one was just one of the weirdest. They're like, take her picture, send it to the bishop. And I literally turned around and went, the bishop knows. I was told by my former parish where I was in charge of all the adult education. I bumped into someone and he's like, so what are you up to? And I saw his face and I'm like, well, and I said it. He goes, I already knew. The bishop knows. We all know. And I'm like, all right, great. You can come any Sunday.
Right. Come attend. Might
So
learn something.
but as much flack as I get and as much attacks that my clergy get, we also have wonderful experiences of like the divorced guy who took communion for the first time and broke down sobbing, you know,
Oh,
the gay couple whose kid we baptized, you know,
oh.
so it's worth it, you know. You can hate me. I don't care. You know, I know I'm doing what God wants me to do.
I think you and I have pretty tough skins.
Oh
You
yeah.
know, every once in a while it hurts, especially when it's someone close. But the smaller ones when they're not so close, I think I've repeated Jesus's words of Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do a
Yeah,
lot.
exactly.
Might get a
Exactly.
t-shirt with that on it at this point.
That's me too. I'm just like patting their head going, if you knew what I knew, you
Yeah,
might agree with me, maybe not, but let's just be friends. Let's not bother each other.
exactly. Like, why argue? But so obviously, you and I do similar things, a little bit different, but let's just speaking of people attacking, how do you know when someone's under demonic influence?
This is part of those spiritual gifts.
Mm-hmm.
Um, that the big thing, I watched a woman allowing herself to get possessed once. I mean, I watched it I was in a spiritualist group. I wasn't Christian at the time. I was 20 something, and I watched this where I learned I had real big gifts in this because we would meditate and I would see all the dead people in the room, and
Ooh,
I would be able to run images like I'm like, I wonder if I can do this. And I thought of a horse running through everyone's brain and they all saw it. I didn't tell them, they just all saw it. So I'm like,
nice.
this is cool. I was experimenting on these wonderful people. Um, but I saw her getting possessed, and what was interesting was I hated her. I don't hate anybody,
Mm-hmm.
but there was this disgust towards her. And when
Mm-hmm.
I saw that, I understood what it was. And after I stopped it, and I couldn't tell you how, and I don't know how I knew how, but I just threw me at it. I just threw at it and it stopped. And she described it as an angel of light was trying to enter and talk to all of you. And I jumped up and pointed at her and screamed, I hate you.
Whoa. Well,
And that's how I can tell that there's something very evil
yeah.
um in a person. I the scriptures, when Jesus encountered Lazarus and death and everybody weeping, because death was the enemy, not Satan.
Mm-hmm.
When Jesus encounters them, in Greek it says he vomited in spirit. There's just this, and I love the scene
You're
from Nefarious where the priest, who doesn't even believe in any of this, when the demon jumps up to shake his hand, he jumps backwards and it's like, I gotta go. Because even he senses it. There's just this response we have to it, I think.
that was actually a really, really good movie.
Love that movie.
Yeah, I someone had
Well
asked
done.
me extremely well done. Someone had asked me, "Hey, can you watch this and just tell me like what you think?" And unfortunately, like I got sidetracked, but I watched it and then I had seen actually you had watched it the week before, and it was one of the best depictions I've seen in a very long time of someone not only being possessed, but the entire, the whole tricks of what they pull, right?
It was like watching a modern Screw Tape Letters with
Yeah.
C.S. Lewis. And people will I see people doing YouTube videos like, this is real possession, and I'm like, no, it's very rare. That's not just total possession, which is extremely rare. It is
Yeah.
total possession and subjugation, which you never see.
Right.
You never see that. So when
You
people
hope
say
not to anyway.
but they had a theological consultant, because there were some subtle things in there, especially someone asked me about this. They're like, the twitching.
Yep.
I'm like,
Yes.
oh yes, that's huge. And they were like, because I knew someone I thought was possessed who used to twitch. And I'm like, yet the body is reacting to the two entities in the head, the two wills.
The way that I've described it is, something is coming in and writing the body and it's wonky, right? Like if
Yes.
imagine you get into like a giant costume and you quite don't know how to walk and move in it and everything looks very jerky and strange.
Yeah.
Um,
Excellent metaphor.
yeah, and it's yeah, God, that movie was really good. There's a show called Evil as well on
My
Paramount
husband
Plus.
watches that and he tries so hard to get me into it. And I'm like, I have a list of TV shows I have to get to.
I would really love you to watch season one
Mm-hmm.
and just let me know what you think. It
Oh,
is based
sure.
on the actual Catholic Church. Um, but to me, it was one of the best ways of showing on a TV series how subversive the adversary really is. I highly recommend, if anyone hasn't watched it yet, give it a thought. I want to end this, Kristina, on a high note.
Okay.
Two questions. The first, what is your most profound spiritual moment?
I would have to, now I'm setting aside like the birth of my children and things like that, just focusing purely on spirit. Um, it was the entire 9 months of my conversion to Catholicism, but in particular, the event that led to it, which was a series of two dreams. Um, and one of them with Saint Michael. And the first dream was one in which I was taking part in trying to rescue a child for this young couple from this very ugly demon-looking thing. And a priest interrupted me 3 times, and all 3 times said, "You need to become Catholic." So I wasn't Catholic, had my degree, but I needed to be ordained, and the Roman Catholic Church didn't ordain women, so I was wrestling with that. 2 times he broke in, and the third time he broke in, he said, "You don't understand," because I kept telling him, "I don't need to be Catholic. I don't need to be religious at all," you know? And the third time he said, "You don't understand. If you do not have your back up against a faith, they'll be able to use you and you'll never know." And at the end of the dream, I handed the children over to the father of this beautiful young couple who looked perfectly wonderful, got it away from this demon-looking guy, and a whirlwind started, sucked the children into the floorboard, and there was a knot with an eye, and it said, "Thanks for the help," and winked. I woke up screaming, and I'm like, "I gotta go to mass," and it was 3 a.m., so mass was at 6. I went back to sleep, and I dreamt about a cafeteria, and this one felt so real. And there were people sitting there with their bags, and they were playing checkers at all of these different tables, and I was in a hallway with elevators just standing there, and behind me was someone I could tell was much taller than me with his hand on my shoulder, and he said, "Your job is, when the names are called, to get the people into the elevators to go up. Not down, never down, the elevators only go up." And I said, "Okay." Or I said, "Yes, Lord," or something like that, "Master." And I heard the ding of the elevators, and I turned and I started to ask, "How will you call their name?" And it was this 7-foot tall guy with black eyes and black hair and huge wings and a sword, and it was Saint Michael. And he said, "You'll know." Then the door shut. I just woke up, went to the church, sat there. RCIA started that morning. And that's the process to become Catholic, and then I was confirmed on Easter Vigil 9 months later and took the name Michael, so that's my confirmation saint.
Wow.
It was that whole thing changed me, and that was 25 years ago this Easter Vigil, half my life, because I turned 50 in March, half my life.
Wow.
Yeah, yeah.
That's beautiful. Well, the last question, just to really end it on a high note, what's your thought of what God is?
I've seen it, for lack of a better term, a couple of times, and I see the Trinity, but I understand the Trinity different than other people. I understand it as motion, mathematics, and fluidity. That the truth is in movement. The truth isn't stagnant. It's in the motion between ideas. And so describing God, God is love sounds trite. God is a verb. God is action, envelopment, immanence, eminence. Um, God is the whole of creation and yet the DNA of the universe. God is music and math. Uh, God is dance and stillness. God is paradox. Uh, we say God is the word, and yet God is the silence. There's a darkness to God, a light to God, a depth, a shallowness. So for me, God is, if you took every paradox in the world and put it together, that would be God, but we'd only be touching God in the same way that putting your foot in the ocean is to touch the ocean, not just a part of it, but to touch the ocean. Plumbing God is to touch God and yet not truly touch God. So for me, it is this incredible ocean of existence and the ground of all being. So it's God is not an old man in the sky, not a cosmological Santa Claus, not an accountant that keeps tabs. God is existence itself. And if for any second God's focus and mind and consciousness were to be removed from any of us for even a second, it would be as if we never existed. And that's what love is. It creates and keeps in creation. So I hope that makes sense. I mean, it's a
It
difficult
does.
concept,
I
but
absolutely, I love it. I love you. Thank you so much
thank
for,
you. I love you too. Thank you for having me. This has been
thank-
wonderful.
please, let's do this again.
Yes,
We haven't done
absolutely.
anything.
Anytime. Anytime.
To everyone out there, please read the show notes. Even if it's $5, please, if you can just donate to the children at the orphanage. And above and beyond all that, her book and her course on demonology, which I know it sounds scary, but it's actually more educational than you will probably have any concept of, because I could run through everything you went in there and people would still have a bazillion questions, but you do such a great job at what you do. Thank you so much for dedicating your life to this and so much of your time and energy and put into getting people real good solid information. Kristina, thank you.
Oh, thank you. It's my pleasure. Thank you so much. And thank you everyone for listening to my ramblings.
Not rambling, love it.